We are back now on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast to continue on talking about young quarterbacks in the NFL. For every good start, for every breakout performance, it seems like there's an opposite reaction to some other young quarterbacks in the NFL, specifically with Will Levis and Caleb Williams. I, for one, was very high on the Tennessee Titans, right? I've come on here, talked about them and how I like the addition on defense. I like Brian Callahan as their coach. I love them bringing in Tyler Boyd's, Calvin Ridley's of the world, right? Before the season started, I liked all of their additions and all surrounding Will Levis. And I know I prefaced having Will Levis still be a critical portion of this, right? Other than being the quarterback, the idea of starting over essentially with him, I thought that was going to be a big swinging point on how this season was going to go for them, and it looks like I was right from that point. But overall, the Titans have been pretty disappointing, and likewise, the same can be said about the Chicago Bears, about my confidence level in them before the season started. I loved all of their additions and kind of had them in the mix of being a pretty tough, competitive team, maybe not with the best record, but still being able to have some moments where you look at them and think, wow, that was a great play, or wow, they're almost there. They really competed with one of the best teams in the NFL. But again, with Caleb and the struggles he's shown, the struggles overall from the Chicago Bears, these two teams, the more you look at them, the more similar it looks from the outside and obviously from the inside looking out as well, because after 3 weeks, both teams are obviously 0-3, and both quarterbacks don't look like they're ready yet to be that final piece of the puzzle that I thought, they were going to just transition to easily. Not to say that Jaden Daniels did it perfectly, but he's obviously, we've seen it quicker from him to where Caleb and Will Levis still now in his second year. It looks like they're just not grasping it yet. Or to me, the situation around them isn't ideal as well. I don't think it's fair to blame it all just on them. So looking more into their season and looking more as to how well they've performed so far, I've kind of looked at all the stats that are pretty prominent for quarterbacks in the NFL and kind of see where Will Levis and Caleb Williams rank among the other quarterbacks and just how their stats line up right now. Looking at the completion percentage for both of these guys, you have Will Levis at 68%, which ranks 13th in the NFL. Then you have Caleb Williams down even further than that at 59%, which is 25th in the NFL. Then you look at total yards for Will Levis. He has 579 total yards through 3 games, which is 24th in the NFL as of right now. And Caleb Williams has 630 yards, which is 17th in the NFL right now. Then yards per game, pretty much the same thing. Will Levis is averaging 193 yards per game, and slightly above that, Caleb Williams is at 210. The rankings don't change, obviously, there. Then the touchdowns, you have Will Levis at 4, which is actually top 10. He is number 9 in terms of touchdowns thrown. And Caleb Williams has only thrown 2 touchdowns. On the other end of it, he's 24th in the NFL in that category. Then interceptions, obviously, not something you want to be leading in. Will Levis has 5 interceptions, which is second most in the NFL, only behind Anthony Richardson, and Caleb Williams just behind him, tied for third place with 4 interceptions through 3 games. The QBR and the quarterback ratings, again, are probably among some of the worst in the NFL. The QBR for Will Levis, the highest QBR right now, has been 29.6, and Caleb Williams hasn't been, or actually Caleb Williams is a little bit worse at 26.8. Will Levis ranks 28th, and Caleb Williams ranks at 29th in that category. And lastly, the quarterback rating put up by both of these guys. Will Levis, a 76.5 quarterback rating, has been his highest this year, which has been only 25th in the NFL right now. And Caleb Williams, worse than that, 65.3, which is 28th in the NFL right now. None of these rankings have any quarterback higher than 13th in any of these categories, which 13th in one category or in a couple categories is okay, but the rest of them having Caleb and Will Levis near the bottom 5, mostly top or bottom 10 in most of these categories is definitely worrying. And then, of course, the stats don't tell the entire story, because if you watch these guys play, they've been in some relatively close games. You look at Will Levis, the game against the Packers, against Malik Willis. I thought that was a game that they could take at home. And they were in spots where they could have won it, but of course, it came down to Will Levis, right, making that boneheaded decision to throw it behind him while he was parallel to the ground, which is just weird. It's hard to describe because that's something a quarterback should obviously not do. So that game, boiled down to him. He's had some rough goings of it. Are actually not the Packers, the Jets, the second week of the season. Against the Packers, actually, this past week, he threw that pick six to Jair Alexander, just miscalculating the throw. Again, another play that you'd love to have back, obviously, looking back at it. So the way that they've played, for all the bad plays that they've made, there has been some good throws. Will Levis made a great throw to Calvin Ridley in that Jets game to score a touchdown as well. When everything is going like it should, he's following the game plan, or everything's flowing very nicely, Will Levis looks like he is under control for the most part. And then also for Caleb Williams, in some of these games, you look at him and he can make some wow plays, some wow throws for sure, but other times, again, much like Will Levis, when things become frantic or discombobulated, I feel like they try to overcompensate some of the issues that they might see, some of the problems with guys rushing at them, right? They try to over-rely on their athleticism, their arm talent, which if they're standing right there and you ask them to make any throw or how far they can throw down the field, Will Levis and Caleb probably have some of the best arms, arguably, in the NFL. But again, once things become frantic, they kind of overestimate their athleticism or over-rely on it. And that's where you get some of the extended plays. You take unnecessary hits, and most of the time it leads to bad decisions when you're running all over the place, trying to buy yourself some time. You can't really get a good picture of everything in front of you. You think someone's open, so you throw it, but the timing is all off, and it usually leads to interceptions, like we've seen Caleb throw, like we've seen Will Levis throw, and just bad decisions overall. That's where I think right now it's their most glaring issue, when things sort of break down, when they become a bit frantic and they're not maybe used to being in the pocket so much. It becomes a flaw of their game, and they're still pretty young, obviously. They're still pretty new to this whole NFL thing, right? To cut them a little bit of slack. Caleb's only a rookie, has only played 3 games in the NFL, and Will Levis, in his second year, he's played longer, but it's hard. Just ask Bryce Young how hard it is to go from one system, trying to learn it, trying to perfect everything in your rookie year, to then having it all being scraped and thrown away into the garbage and trying to learn something else, brand new verbiage, new everything, trying to learn everything there is to know about that system, and then how teams try to attack it and whatnot. In your second year, only to kind of restart everything can't be much easier than what Caleb's going through right now. And I thought it was ironic, now getting into the similarities between both of these teams, how similar they went about going through this offseason, right? Because you look at the reinforcements that they made, the Tennessee Titans bringing in Calvin Ridley, Tyler Boyd, adding on to DJ Moore, or actually adding on to DeAndre Hopkins. For the Bears, adding on to DJ Moore, they likewise brought in Keenan Allen and drafted Rome Odunze. They brought in 2 wide receivers each to make this big 3 at that spot. And also they added running backs. The Titans added Tony Pollard. The Chicago Bears added DeAndre Swift. And also, they've added mostly to their offense, right? Because their defenses have been pretty solid, or at least pretty good enough to win you some of these games, right? I think with the level of defense that the Titans have, they should have at least won one of these games, or actually 2 of these games, because they should have won against the Bears. Ironic enough, they've already played against each other. The Titans should have won that game. They didn't allow a touchdown on defense, right? It was mostly just the Bears defense scoring as well. So the Titans could really have 2 wins if also they would have won that Jets game, if it wasn't for that bad decision by Will Levis. They could be 2-1 right now, and we wouldn't be having this conversation, but it's all based on these decisions, right, for for organizations and what creates these differences in a lot of these games. And you look at the Chicago Bears and their defense, it basically won them the game against the Titans. Then you look at the Colts, they were in it. The Chicago Bears defense kind of kept them in it, but their offense couldn't respond in an adequate amount of production the other way. And to me, that's where you can kind of look at the team aspect of this all, right? It's not just the fact that these two guys can't play in the NFL. These two guys are very talented, but not everybody can look like Jaden Daniels. One, because not everybody's the same player, but also you look at the additions and how the Commanders are going about things, and you look at these two teams and how different it is, because while these guys might have the big threes at wide receivers, the biggest thing about both of them is that I don't really like their running game, and then once the running game isn't really working, you look at why that is, and both of these teams' offensive lines aren't great. You look at the amount of sacks both of them have taken. Will Levis has been sacked 15 times already. That's second in the NFL. And Caleb Williams has been sacked 13 times. That's third in the NFL so far. And the running game, the lack of the running game for both of these teams is really what bothers me. Because you look at the Titans, they've ran the ball 11 total times last week against the Green Bay Packers, and the other games, they've ran it a total of 26 and 28 times, respectively, as a whole in each of those games. The Titans are bottom 5 in rush attempts in the NFL, and they're only middle of the pack in all other categories in the running, category overall. And that's just not good enough. For as talented as all these receivers are, you can see why, if it's such an imbalance like this, it leads to more of an opportunity for Will Levis, who is still probably trying to learn everything, to make more mistakes. So that's something I really don't like about it. And also, Chicago might be even worse, because they're middle of the pack to bottom in the NFL in all the rushing categories. It stands out in the yards department because it shows the production or the lack of production that this running game produces. You look at some of these numbers, 31, the Bears rank 31st in the NFL in total yards and yards per game rushing. And also to add on top of that, because they're not seeing the production from the running game because it has been so bad, Caleb Williams has been throwing more and more each game. He threw for a certain amount the first game, that jumped up in the second game, and he just threw 52 times in week 3. They're not going to win any games with Caleb throwing 52 times. I'll tell you that right now. As talented as he is, that offensive line, having him throw that many times gives the other team an opportunity to just run at him because of how bad this offensive line is. In pass protection, you see it with the amount of sacks Caleb's taken, and then in the running game, they're not producing anything as well. They're not even like one-dimensional. They're like no-dimensional or something like that. It's hard to produce anything because of the fact that these offenses have been kind of built backwards almost. They've really negated the offensive line. And you go back to Washington and how they added Nick Allegretti, Tyler Biotic, and it's only 2 guys, but it makes the difference because this Bears offensive line, the Titans offensive line, and their running games each have not been particularly good. That's something else the Commanders do very well with Brian Robinson and Austin Eckler. It might not be the most household names, but they're looking a lot better right now with their quarterback. So that's something I think I attribute it to at this point. And if I were to say I'm more worried about one of these situations, I would probably say Caleb, right? Because the Bears used up a lot to go and get him. They planned everything around Caleb for the last 7 months, 8 months. So everybody knew he was going to be a Chicago Bears player. So for it to kind of not start off this good or this well, and then you start thinking existential crises, right? And how are the Bears going to ruin another top drafted quarterback? And then you look at how Jaden Daniels is playing, you go to a very pessimistic place. But it's weird because I also think that the Bears could get out of it sooner rather than the Tennessee Titans, just because I feel like Ryan Poles has been very adamant about trying to improve this team, going out and being uber aggressive, going out and really having a clear vision of what he wants in this organization. I don't think he'd let Caleb Williams be a bust or anything like that. So I'm more worried about them now for the worst outcome, the worst possible scenario that can happen with them. But in the other sense, I feel like they could get out of it sooner because they know how significant this is. They know how special it is to have a number one pick, be the quarterback, be the face of your franchise. I think the consequences on the other side of that will make me feel like Ryan Poles is really going to be very aggressive in trying to correct this situation. He's obviously seen it now. They're not very good at 0-3, obviously. So I think this should spark them a little bit, that kind of kick things into gear. And I don't think he's afraid of making some big decisions, some big personnel changes, or suggesting it if he has to. But that's pretty much where I stand on both of them. Caleb and Will haven't been the most exciting as of yet. They've looked a little bit all over the place, but still, it is relatively early. We're not talking playoffs anymore, I don't think, for these teams, but at least getting it to look better should be both of their goals going forward. But speaking about going forward, talking about some personnel changes, we look at the Jacksonville Jaguars and we ask the question, is Doug Peterson, or should Doug Peterson be on the hot seat if this team goes to 0-4? We look at what their owner had to say about it, what Doug Peterson said about the Bills' laws, and what are our thoughts on Doug Peterson and whether or not he should be on the hot seat. That is coming up in just a few seconds. We'll be right back.